So come in and join us in the dustyfeet.com because this is a place where we can safely explore the endless ways of God, interconnection of His creation, where belief understandings they may be challenged, divine misunderstandings they may exist, and traditional teachings they might falter as we pursue connection, context, and community with God and each other here in an environment of grace and love. So feel free to journey around the space. We have so many different topics for discussion. We have Outside the Class, Sons of the Father, Bible Project, Aleph Beta, Follow the Red String, and more. Lend your ear and then lend your voice. Join a conversation. Start a conversation. Ask questions. Because on this journey, you're probably around folks that just might be pondering the same thing. Community that can build and connect. Come in and join. And welcome to Outside the Class. It's March 28th, 2023, and we're continuing in our Matthew series with Tim Mackie with episode 30 Love Poems, Vineyards, and Rocks. This is part one. With this way of doing things, you can watch the video before we begin chatting. So we helped keep these to around 15 minutes or so. Easy to catch and even easier to catch up on. So, welcome to Outside the Class. In the description below are links to all of the audio, video, and source documents that we use here in the Dusty Feet. We want to make sure that any material we use here is properly credited to those folks who work so hard to bring it to us. Without their efforts, the learning we do here does not happen. And remember on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe and click that bell icon if you want. And again, it's expected that you watch the reference videos first so you can get a context for this discussion and to hear the perspective of the originator. Now, on the dustyfeet.com, in the Outside the Class section, we have this Matthew series. Each of these source videos are posted in advance each week on the site. Of course, as always, the links are in the description below as well. So, if you haven't yet, pause this, either go to thedustyfeet.com or click on the link in the description below, and when you come back, we can chat. And we're back. Okay, again, I want to make it kind of clear as we begin that I'll be mentioning or discussing some points that'll be can be very challenging for some. They will. And again, I suspect it will divide the room at times. But my intent is to share what I currently believe and understand about kingdom of God concepts, both narrow and wide. Okay? Now we are continuing in Matthew chapter 21, but then we have this nice little side trip into Isaiah, right? So let's start with an interesting question that maybe we can ask ourselves if we dare. How does an unchanging God do things differently? Okay, that's going to perk up some ears for sure. And But maybe I guess an important preceding question might also be maybe what do we mean by an unchanging God? That's fair. So, for the sake of this discussion and the context that I'm going to be using, right, it will be addressing the unchanging character of God. That is, his love, grace, mercy, righteousness, and justice. Those are not subject to change. Okay, you know me, I love the uncomfortable questions. The ones that probably more often than not we really don't have an answer for. Because we can only view things by what we, well, at least what we think we know, right? Like, how did God deal with those that followed him before the flood? Does God treat those that have followed him in the past, say even before Jesus, right, differently than those today? All of this, that all stems from that beautifully, um, that amazing passage, uh, that poetic passage from Isaiah. Yeah, because Tim brings up some great points about the people that said that they would follow God, right, to do things His way, and then be a light to the nations. But they did not hold up their part of the covenant commitment. But I mean, as a people, right, as a whole community. Okay, so with this story in Isaiah, we had what? We had God planting a vineyard. And the fruit from those vines, not so good. What what did Tim say? Stinky grapes. There you go. But remember that in vines and branches and scriptural metaphors are used for a few references. In this one, God is the one that plants the vineyard, and say with Jesus, it where he says he's the vine, right? Is an I am the vine and you are the branches. But in both of those, it's us that are those branches, right? The people. We are the ones that the fruit is born from. This is where you look for fruit. So God is looking for something in Isaiah, right? And he's looking for what? He's looking for justice and righteousness. And he finds bloodshed and distress. Okay, so here's a question. So why is God looking for that in us? I thought God was justice and righteousness. But then Tim brings up the Hebrew terms, right? Mishpat, the Hebrew term for justice, and tzedakah, the Hebrew term for righteousness. And then Tim mentions that these are communal words, right? They're about relationship. So I want to run with that for a bit. So that's doing what is right in a communal environment, right? In this relationship environment. So I'm going to bring up Torah, as in the instructions given at Mount Sinai. Okay. Because the purpose of those instructions, and it plays out if one reads them, that they deal with two relational issues. They're either relating towards God or towards community, your fellow man. So God gave some instructions on what his expectations were. I kind of like that. I like knowing expectations. Um, I know that can be very frustrating at times when you don't know expectations, because I know that. Um, but there's an interesting sub question that really puts the terms that we're talking about together. For me, it's, can you have one without the other? Because they are, in a way, inseparable, at least in God's kingdom ways. And it's very much a part of the image of God, those character attributes, uh, what we are capable of, what we were created in the image of, right? But there's another sub question, another one that might need to be addressed as well, is how can you have justice without righteousness? How can you render or determine justice without an expectation to know what's to do right, right? Because how can God be just without telling you what is the right thing to do, right? I know. And we can look back as far as we want. We can still ask the same questions. How can God be just without us or them, right? Knowing the right thing. Even back to the garden, right? But Tim brings up the point that in order to deal out mishpat, that they had to know tzedakah, right? It is what God was holding them accountable to. So when he's talking about accusing, mistreating, cheating, both with God and community, that's what Isaiah is pointing out to the people. You know what's funny? It seems that Jesus makes those same points when he's talking. Because he's not bringing a whole new set of instructions. He's reminding them that they need to get back to the basics, to get back to your first love. I think we've heard that term before. But then times you can have brutal and disheartening questions that pop up, but it's really going to take a context term to really grab this. Okay, the I am the vine and you are the branches. As remember, we are post Jesus, so let's say there's more detail to the story, right? Because there are a few parables with these analogies that deal with vines and branches and fruit. So I see a God who has an unchanging character with the same expectations, with the same wish, right? Us to be a light to the nations, a salt to the earth. Where did Jesus say that stuff? And I love the point that Tim brought about why God so many times he spoke to us through the prophets or Jesus, and he used poetry and parables, right? It's not because they are on the surface, right, a bit unclear, but in their fullness, they can actually speak so much more. What's the phrase that Tim used? Ambiguity with a surplus of meaning. I love that one. I love it. Okay, so now let's get on to another uncomfortable point to ponder. And it's from Matthew chapter 21, verse 31. Because remember, because parts of things that we often miss because sometimes we don't read what is actually written or said. But since we've heard the story before and we've already been told what it means, right? So here's the discomfort. Because in our terms, we often think or hear that we need that folks are they're in or they're out. They're in or they're out. But if we really read what's written or listen to the words that are spoken, we hear more about lesser and greater, first and last. Those sound like together words to me. Then here we have one of those points here. It's here in this verse, Matthew 21:31. So, which one of the two did the will of his father? And they said, the first. And Jesus said to them, truly I say to you that the tax collectors and the prostitutes will get into the kingdom of God before you. You know, Jesus talking about the parable of the two sons, and notice the relational connection between this parable and the prodigal son. But his answer is, truly I say to you that the tax collectors and the prostitutes will get into the kingdom of God before you. So are they in or are they out? Because that's more often than not the question that we like to ask, that we ask is it in or out? I think we're asking the wrong questions. But we hear time and time again in these stories, especially with one surrounding Jesus. Um, who is first? Who is greater? I got James and John, right? Who gets the favored seats? But a quick glance over our shoulders to 15 chapters back, we get that upside down view, the reverse of roles. So I'm not really surprised to read or hear, truly I say to you that the tax collectors and the prostitutes will get into the kingdom of God before you. To get in there. Yes. So maybe there's more to the picture. Ambiguity with a surplus of meaning. And I'm more and more persuaded that the meaning is still more than we think or see, especially this time. And we'll see in part 2 that's coming, right? Even more about this with the parable of the tenants. And again, I'd probably be prepared for some more discomfort. But this is always in a safe place with grace and love at the core. So, again, thanks for being with us today on Outside the Class. And then we have our point to ponder. This one is a very lighthearted one. It's a Far Side cartoon, but it connected with me. Brother O'Leary discovers a loophole in his vow of silence. this is so much your host. And thank you for being with us today on Outside the Class on the Dusty Feed.